is it okay if we ask you questions that are not from the list? Yeah.
चलेगा
Yeah.
चलेगा यारा
चलेगा? ठीक है, ठीक है.
So welcome to the 5th episode of Angon. Welcome Mukhtar, welcome Aftab.
Today, we've had females in all the previous podcasts, but today we have these two males who are not residents of Bangladesh or Pakistan. They're currently residing in Birmingham. So we have Aftab, Rahman, and select to Birmingham, and he is director of Legacy West Midlands. And I checked out Legacy West Midlands very thoroughly. So I'm totally impressed by the kind of work that you're doing, the grandma stories, the old wives' tales. Then we have Mukhtar, who's from Morga, which is a village near Rawalpindi. He also moved as a young child to Birmingham. And he is well in the visual arts, but also in the more performing arts. So he is director of the Simmertown Festival, and he started an organization called Collaboration, and I love the name. I was totally impressed by Sai of the Musafir, which I saw in Birmingham.
What comes to your mind when you think about Pakistan, Aftab?
I've looked at the questions and I've been rehearsing some of my replies, but I think I'll go off script a little bit. I think Quaid Azam comes to mind, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who in my view has had a bad press through history, but certainly he's the father figure of Pakistan. And if I physically think of Pakistan, I've had the good fortune of visiting Pakistan about 16 years ago. The reason I visited Pakistan was I grew up with Pakistani friends, lived in a neighborhood with Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Indians, and so on. And I wanted to find out why they are the way they are. And I had a visit about 16 years ago, and I stayed in Dina. I was in Rawalpindi, and I went to Rawalpindi. I was in Dina near Mangla Dam, and I saw this beautiful, beautiful lake. And I was with my Pakistani friends, and I said, "Listen, I have to go for a swim in this in the lake." And they're like, "Okay, after." And I went and had a swim, and they were really shocked. They said, "Oh, this is a dam." And I thought, "Listen, I'm a Bengali. This is what I do. I swim." So I had a swim in Mangla Dam. I went to Lahore Fort, and I went to Pajadapai in Lahore. I saw a play, and I went to Akbar's place, and yeah, that's my experiences of Pakistan. Those things come to mind. I went with a friend, and I stayed with a family, and one of my endearing memories is that of his father. He called me the Nikka one. And he kind of took me in as like his fourth son, and he's a very tall man. I always ask about him. He's in his 90s, very tall, very elegant, very gentle man. So those are my endearing memories of Pakistan.
So Mukhtar, what about you? Have you been to Bangladesh?
No, I'm waiting for Aftab to invite me.
Yeah. Okay, then we'll just talk about Birmingham and how you kind of connect with the Bangladeshis there. As in, how do the two communities really interact with each other? Are they two communities? Or are they one now? I don't know much about that.
Yeah, in terms of, I can still kind of answer the question in terms of Bangladesh and my perceptions, because really what happened was that I grew up in Pakistan. I came here at the age of 7, and then I was sent back to Pakistan with my sister and my mother, because my father felt that I should be schooled there and I should know my culture and my language. So I came at the age of 7, and I was in Pakistan when the war took place with the War of Liberation, and Bangladesh came into being. And what I felt, my perceptions of Bangladesh and Bangladeshi people were totally different at that time to what they became when I came to England. And previously in Pakistan, they were based upon ignorance. And because at the time, Morgaon was very close to the oil refinery, and Rawalpindi is a military city, and the atmosphere changed because the oil refinery became painted in camouflage military colors, and on the hill surrounding the village, there was anti-aircraft guns were moved in there, and everybody in the village started to dig bunkers. And one of my memories is being in a bunker, in the garden, mud houses that we had. Most of the people in the village who were kind of semi-workers, but mainly peasants, kept small livelihoods. And being in the bunker whilst hearing the air raids going and aeroplanes going above, my nani reciting the kalma. And the school that I went to, every morning we had to raise the flag, sing the national anthem, and all the textbooks were totally nationalistic and full of military heroes. And so I grew up very, very patriotic, hyper-nationalistic. I hated Indians, and I didn't know much about Bangladeshis. I thought Bangladeshis were people who betrayed the bigger cause. But basically, anything that was non-Pakistani, I was prejudicial to, I was bigoted, I was a reactionary, I was a nationalist. And I hated India because I was told India is an arch enemy. So when then I came to England, to the city of Sheffield, to join my father at the age of 11, in my house, my father had a Sikh family living there. And I just couldn't believe this. So I had a fight with the young Sikh boy, calling all sorts of obscenities. And then fast forward to 1980s, Britain was in a recession, and there was a phenomena called Paki bashing, and racist attacks were taking place on a massive scale. In every major city with Asian communities, we were under siege, people being attacked, people being murdered, our place of worship being attacked. And particularly the east end of London, where the Bangladeshi community existed, there was a couple of very high profile murders, one in particular of Altaf Ali. Yeah, and that really, and then also in Southall, there was a major incident that took place where the National Front, which is a parliamentary right-wing organization, was challenged by the youth. So basically what happened is that racism as a common enemy for Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and Indians, all of us who are non-white, made us come together. And in Sheffield, we formed an organization, I was a founding member of an organization called the Asian Youth Movement. We had members who were Bangladeshi, so Ranjit Chakrabarti, who sadly passed away, I think last year, Jaishri, Badshah. We had a number of Bangladeshi members. We had Pakistani, Kashmiri, Indian, Sri Lankan, Eastern Indian. Anybody who was Asian was a member. We had one common aim, and that was to fight fascism and racism. And we defended families. And one of the families I remember defending was a Bangladeshi family, which had been attacked by skinheads, and being in their house tooled up with my colleagues, with what we used to carry in those days were called chili bombs. Anyway, and really, my whole perception of Bangladesh has changed, because previously we were kind of, the stereotypes were based around the fact that Bangladeshis were meek, weak, betrayers, they didn't fight back. But what happened was that actually the battles that took place in the east end of London against the skinheads, Bangladeshi youth were at the forefront. And then in the northern cities, we began to go to the east end to support our Bangladeshi brothers and sisters. And so the whole perception changed. And also the Asian youth movements was the largest grassroots working class defensive movement in the history of South Asian communities. From Scotland, Bradford, all the major cities, these organizations sprung up to defend the communities. Not only did we defend the communities, but we also began to look at history and why we were here. And looking at that history, we began to put the jigsaw together. And putting the jigsaw together, we looked at 47, 71, and we became educated. And what we learned, actually, the war of liberation that took place was justified, correct. War crimes got committed, and we had to challenge ourselves. And some of my dear friends were Bangladeshis, opened up my eyes. And so I've learned about key liberation freedom fighters, poets like Nazrul Islam. So from being a bigot, a chauvinist, prejudicial. I became totally the opposite. I've actually recognized that Bangladesh is no different to any of the countries. In fact, West Pakistanis, or the leaders in West Pakistan, exploited and oppressed, used all sorts of reactionary, racist, prejudicial ideology to justify that. And so I became a supporter of the Bangladesh for our own reasons, because minorities, if we can't support the minorities, recognize, empathize, then it doesn't say much about ourselves. So that's my kind of perceptions of how it's changed about Bangladeshi people.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's very interesting. I would be curious to know, Aftab, like your perspective on that whole history. Mukhtar that was just sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating, and Mukhtar has a special place in the Bangladeshi community. He's seen as somebody who has never ever been prejudicial to us. He's always supported us. So Mukhtar has a special place in our heart, and I put that on record. And Mukhtar knows. But in terms of history and so on, Mukhtar has a few years on me, although I have the grey hair. And our journeys are slightly different. Mukhtar started in Sheffield. I've always lived and sort of worked in Birmingham. And of course, we suffered in the 70s and 80s. We suffered from Paki bashing and so on. So what we had was slightly different as well. We were the last of the families to arrive to the UK. So within the Pakistani Indian community, their children pretty much joined them in the 50s, 60s, and so on. Whereas within the Bangladeshi communities, we were the last to arrive. We arrived in the mid 70s, early 80s. So our language development was slightly poor, and we were often seen as the poor cousins to the Pakistanis and Indians. And you know, in my earlier comment, I said I wanted to know why they treated us the way they did, or the Pakistanis behaved in that way. They called us Bangalias. You know, we weren't even a caste in the eyes of the Pakistanis. And I'm not talking about Mukhtar, I'm talking about some of the young men that I grew up with. We were known as Bangalias. We were bullied, we were harassed during the 90s when the racism from the white skinheads and so on had dissipated and they'd moved out. It was the Pakistani community which actually started to harass us a lot. I grew up in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is an area which is quite tight-knit, so I had lots of Pakistani friends, so we didn't have much trouble there, but we had trouble from Pakistanis in Aston, really violent thugs, you know, who were into all sorts of criminality and so on. And we stood up to it. We organized ourselves, we stood up to it. We had several fights within the Pakistani community and the Bangladeshi community, to the point where several of us were hospitalized. Myself personally, I used to own a shop, a cafe in Los Angeles. My shop was attacked, and I went out to fight these young men, and as a result, I was attacked and my skull was fractured. So, you know, we have different experiences, but it took those fights in the early 90s, 92, 95, to establish ourselves as a community, to say, well, actually, you know what, we're not as big as you, but we'll fight and we'll stand and fight. And it sort of established our reputation as equals in some respects. So the fighting pretty much stopped. The same level of antagonism isn't there, you know, with young people. Many of them don't know about the Liberation War. Many of them don't know about our struggles against Pakistani people and so on. It's not documented. As a community in UK, besides Brick Lane and London, we're not featured very much. We're banded together as Indians, you know, as South Asians, and you know, we don't have the same presence, although things are changing slightly. So that's my experience of growing up in Birmingham.
I want to ask you both in the sense that Legacy West Midlands, actually, most of your projects are Although in the description, it kind of says the Asian communities or the South Asian communities or something like that. But most of your projects are kind of centered on Bangladesh. Not Mukhtar's, because Simmer Down has people from all over the brown and black communities. So is that a conscious effort, or did you just, is it just that the narratives that you're getting are from Bangladeshi communities?
Okay, so just to clarify, Legacy was established in 2010, and the reason I was a founding member, I established it from my living room. And the reason I did it was to collect stories of Bangladeshi people. At the time, there wasn't many books on the Bangladeshi community. I think there was 3 or 4 books. And this whole came about with discussions with my father, who had since passed away. He would talk about how he had arrived in the UK and how they would live as a community with 10, 15 people in a household, how they eat. So I did a project called Bangla Food Journey. So Legacy started with that as a Bangla food journey. And since then, we've done, in fact, the truth is we've only done 2 specifically Bangladeshi projects. The rest of them are multinational, multicultural, and so on. But the issue is when you deliver your projects out of Lozells, Aston, Handsworth, or Lozells in particular, there's a big Bangladeshi community. So they're attracted to it. So even though our programs are wide, far reaching, many of our clients are Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and those communities. So we're not focused that way. But ultimately, my heritage is Bangladeshi. My roots are Bangladeshi. My access point is the Bangladeshi community. And I've worked in the community for 30 years. So sometimes when you start something, you go to where you know you can get results. And to start off with what we did, it's what we did. But our appeal is much, much broader, although it looks like Bangladeshi. Our staff is multicultural. For the first 5 years, it was me, and then it was part-time. Then we had a full staff team. In fact, Mukhtar's sister, Muz used to work for us. She was the second most senior person with us. She worked with us for 3 years. Our staff team is mostly women. There's 3 men and 7, 8 women. We have 3 African Caribbean members of staff, a white person, an Indian person, and 3 Bangladeshi. So our team is broad. Legacy's board it has 1 or 2 Bangladeshi people. Other than that, everybody represent the community: African Caribbean, English, Pakistani, Indian heritage. So we've consciously ensured that our board is diverse, our staff team is diverse as well.
Okay, I'm so sorry if my question offended you. I didn't mean it like that.
No, it's
that
not
the projects that, yeah.
No, I mean, we did the Old Wives' Tales, which was migration journey of Bangladeshi women, but then that project went all over Europe. We got more funding and we collected stories of grandmothers from across Europe. So our appeal is broader, but our heritage is Bangladeshi, and sometimes it's easier to work with people you know, and you know, you move forward in that vein.
And I would say it's really important because, you know, in the wider Birmingham arts ecology sector or in the community sector, we don't really get to hear of the stories of the Bangladeshi communities, and particularly, you know, the project you did around the women in the community. You know, those stories are never told. You know, and as like Aftab has said, is that you know, the Bangladeshi, a lot of the families came a lot later, and you know, in some ways, other communities tend to overshadow the needs of, you know, the communities that are marginalized. So I think the work that Aftab and Legacy have done to profile and raise the awareness around the needs of the, and for that community to exert its presence in the city, it is really, really important. And for the community to acknowledge and recognize that. You know, and Aftab raised about, you know, while in the early generations, you know, in the city, Birmingham was particularly known for first generation organizations. So we had the Indian Work Association, the Pakistani workers, the Kashmiri workers, and the Bangladeshi Work Association. And these were, And when the war took place, there are stories in Birmingham how Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, and Kashmiris and Indians who worked in the same factories did not allow the war back in the subcontinent affect them here. They had, so there are some really amazing stories of that. And then, when Aftab then talks about Pakistani gangs, and so that phenomenon arose in the 90s, and you had Indian gangs, Sher Punjab, you had the Panthers, the Pakistani gangs, and there was internal fights began to take place. So, and there are reasons for that when we start, why that happened. White flight took place, but also, the state responded to the militancy of our youth by throwing money into the areas, the ghettos, and that increased competition and fragmented communities along ethnic and religious lines. And so previously, where we united against the common enemy of racism, now there was competition for limited money, and then also, a lot of those prejudices. And to be honest, a lot of our communities are ignorant. The history of what happened to Bangladesh has never been told. It doesn't get told to young people growing up here. So they grow with all the prejudices that their parents have told them. And sometimes when they interact with young Bangladeshis, maybe they build friendships and they get challenged. But really, we don't have a systematic, curriculum here or anything in the community that this is where the work that Legacy does, but also the work that Transforming Narrative, the project you're doing, is important because it challenges those prejudices and those the hangover from the 71.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct about that. When Samira came up with this project, the only reason that I really wanted to take it on is because I think dialogue is important for this thing. And because I was in the same boat as you, but until much recently. And, it's like a shocker what we did to the Bangladeshis. And when I told my son, he was like, I think I feel as a normal white American would feel when he hears the genocide that took place, of the local communities. So, and the reason why we've called you both here is because you are, in a way, spearheading your community's cultural aspect. So that's very important, because Mukhtar, when we were talking about you in Karachi, and this was something that would make you feel very happy, we were talking about, who are the Pakistanis who are kind of helping the cultural side of the community there. And there was this singer who's done something with Transforming Narratives, I forget his name. And I said, I think I only know Mukhtar. He said, yeah, I think Mukhtar is shouldering it completely. So he's getting people from here, he's getting people from Asia, he's trying to do that. And so I feel that Aftab too, in this way, that's why we've called you both here. So you guys are literally spearheading this thing where you're where you're making people aware and you're linking people together, really.
I have one question. It's regarding you can certainly also ask each other questions. It's not like only we're asking questions, but I'm really curious to know, because now you heard about us doing this project, but you're also way ahead. You've been working with Transforming Narratives and your own projects and your own, organizations and etc. So, what do you think is the point of it all? For example, we're having this conversation here, what is the goal? What can we achieve through this? You know what I mean? In terms of having a dialogue with people from Bangladesh and people from Pakistan, or, the communities, the respective diaspora communities in Birmingham. What do you think can we achieve? Is there anything to achieve with the sort of projects we're doing in dialogues?
Can I respond, Mukhtar? You guys are touching the surface of deep, deep pain, deep pain. When I think about Bangladesh, when I think about the genocide, I sit and cry, and for Pakistan not to acknowledge what they did, not to have an apology forthcoming, it's deeply hurtful. You can do all you want, but unless your state actually apologizes and admits and accepts what it's done, it's okay. You know, Mukhtar and I are friends, and we live side by side. In fact, Mukhtar's house is 4 miles from my house, you know. But that's the real thing, you know. You need to acknowledge it. You need to accept that this shit happened, and this is how you treated us, and you killed us, and you ravaged, and you raped our communities. If you can't do that, then what's the point?
I think that's, you know, I've never come across in my life in Birmingham or in the UK any animosity from any Bangladeshi, to be honest. And given what took place, and it's correct to describe it as a genocide and the mass systematic rape that took place,
Yeah,
you know, in Bangladesh, and it's that, you know, given what happened, as I say, no Bangladeshi friend or colleague or anybody on the street has ever come to me, you know, with hatred or animosity, really. Maybe they've expressed it. And I think it's right for us to acknowledge what took place, and there needs to be an apology, because Pakistan got created. These two geographical entities, what were West Pakistan, East Pakistan, were created havens for minorities, Muslims who were being persecuted. And then for West Pakistan to engage in systematic persecution, exploitation, oppression of Bangladeshi, who legitimately and rightfully their language should have been the national language, and then to justify it with some, you know, almost a racist ideology, you know, it's important for Pakistanis and the diaspora in the UK to understand that history. And in order, we can't brush it under the carpet. It needs to be brought out into the open, and there needs to be an apology. And those that were responsible for that, because it happened, the people around in our community who remember it, it's not long ago. And those responsible should be held accountable for war crimes. And ultimately for me, you know, it's always about bringing people together. And there's no difference between the Bangladeshis and Pakistanis as people. It's the state and peoples in power who are responsible for that. And the way we move forward as people, as communities, with a shared history and a shared heritage, is by making a formal apology, but also importantly, educating our children and educating our kids in our community. Because when we talk about our struggles against racism, it's hollow if we don't recognize the injustice, the prejudice, the racism that took place to another section of our community by people from our so-called country back home. So
sorry.
Can I just add, building on what Mukhtar said, look, you are educated people, right? Sheikh Mujib won the war. Sorry, Sheikh Mujib won the election. By right, he should have been the president of West and East Pakistan. I think it was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who was the president at the time, did not allow power to exceed, instead, you know, created all of this. So you need to take responsibility. I'm not saying yourselves, but, you know, what happened was undemocratic, and what followed it was massacre, you know, and you don't feel it in the same way as we do. When I go to my village, when I speak to my mom, she tells me about the story. She tells me about the people we lost. You know, she tells me about how sisters of a certain age had to have their hair cut and their shoe polish put on their face. You know, all of these are in our memory, and it burns really deep, because the war was fought on our land. Therefore, it impacted us, you know, and it didn't have the same impact in the Pakistani people that lived in Pakistan.
Can I say something? First, and then I'll get to you, Aftab. So, Samira, I know you haven't asked me this question, but it was for both of them. But I feel that even if a national apology is not forthcoming, I feel that such projects like transforming narratives have really made a difference, and will do so, because for me, this was the eye opener. So if people, even if we educate one person at a time, and we make them see what happened really, we will be achieving a small target. And so we can't do anything about government's stance, but this project is achieving a lot, I feel. And Aftab, that I will put to you, because when I had a talk with you and we spoke about, you told me that you're collecting narratives of people who, at that time I hadn't checked your website. So I realized, because my work is all about 1971 now, so I realized that I needed to start collecting narratives as well. And why Pakistan is not that impacted, because the war took place thousands of 1,000 kilometers or something distant from them, right? It's the distance between the two nations. So this side was sitting calm, whereas then now that I've started taking narratives, I've seen that those people who came, who left Bangladesh, who thought of Dhaka as home, but they had to literally rush out, they also suffered. But nobody asked them, because we were at fault. So their personal, since let's say our government was at fault, their personal stories held no account at that point. And nobody asked. So there are those few narratives that come in the middle. And yes, you're absolutely right. Sheikh Mujib won the war, and all the Pakistanis who were living in Dhaka and that I've asked, they love him. They all say, "वो बहुत अच्छा बंदा था," you know. So that narrative is also there. That narrative of love, but having to leave a place you love also. But I think transforming narratives is making a big difference, at least to me. And dialogue does make a difference.
Can I come back? I absolutely agree with you, Masuma. I mean, the very fact of transforming narrative has allowed this interaction. I will tell you, last week I was speaking to the archive project, Kashmir CAP, Karachi, yeah, and
Citizens Archive.
Citizens Archive, and they've put in a digital project to collect recipes and so on, and they're working with us if we get the money. So certainly at that level is fantastic. But what you don't see, Mukhtar and I see from transforming narratives, how it operates in Birmingham, right? Most of the money goes to these institutions that have been around for such a long time, right? You get a small bone from that plate, right?
You'll have to edit this one.
No, please don't edit this. No, this is the truth. You need to understand the truth. This is when Mukhtar and I talk about racism and injustice. This is all about it, right? Because the mainstream arts institution have let our communities down. This is why Mukhtar and I do what we do. There are organizations that get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds, yet they still compete with us for that £5,000 that are supposed to be for our communities. This is the only program with our name on it, Pakistani Bangladeshi. This is the only program. Yet, if you start to do an analysis where the money goes, it doesn't come to us. The last digital program funding, none of it came to a Bangladeshi organization. Now you imagine that for a minute. I'll stop there.
Okay, heavy.
You know, if there's other people who want to do similar projects or, you know, continue those kind of projects, like what would you give them as an advice? You know, where should they dig? What should they do? What can, you know, like our generation do for the even younger generation?
The way for me, as an artist, it's work that I produce. At the end of the day, one is, I believe that it's got to touch people emotionally, but also, you know, in the 80s, growing up as an artist, you know, we could not be disconnected from our communities. You know, our slogan was, for me as an artist, it was, do I pick up the megaphone or the camera? When somebody dies on your street, you know, my elders, you know, who were giants, who taught us the values that we have today, So actually, it's not your requirements as an artist, it's the requirements of your people. So the person that just got murdered could have been my father or my brother or sister, because they weren't murdered because of the color of their skin. So the point I'm making is that as artists, we had no choice but to use our art form in the service of what we call the struggle and to raise awareness. So for me, as Masuma talks about, I described herself as a cultural activist. Similarly, I believe that as a cultural activist, my job is to create work, and beautiful work, well-crafted, high production values, but at the same time, also show, a work that's going to challenge people, and also contribute to creating a more caring, a more equitable society. And what racism did is it taught us what we were against, but then we have to do work to find out what is it we're fighting for. And so the Saif the Musafir, essentially it was that actually we're all Musafir, we're all travelers. As human beings, we have two legs. As soon as we take one foot forward, we've moved geographically. So from Indus Valley civilization to 47, the partition, to 71, we covered 71 in the production, not in a big way, but we still also showed that the two-nation theory, the idea that actually the Hindus and Muslims were somehow, irreconcilable, different, Bangladesh proved that actually the basis on which Pakistan came into being was incorrect. And we're still in that journey. And Faiz Ahmed Faiz, our great poem says, Chalo hum chale bhi wo manzil, come on, let's go. We've yet to reach that destination. And what our ancestors, be it in Bangladesh or in Pakistan, fought for, that haven where minorities can live in safety, where as human beings we can realize our full creative potential. We've not achieved that yet. And in Pakistan, we have other national minorities that are persecuted. So inside the Musafir, we also had a Hindu Pakistani girl, because we want to show actually Pakistan is diverse, and there are religious minorities in Pakistan that don't get a look in, that are persecuted. And so for me, as an artist, and for your next generation, is to tell that that they're the next phase of a long history of struggle. Mm-hmm. Our ancestors or generation before us inspired us, opened up our eyes, gave us a baton. We need to move that forward. So for me as an artist is to kind of say to young people, actually create great art, but also art with social purpose and significance, contribute to the greater, we have a climate crisis. So my kids, the issues that they face are far worse than what we went through, even though we went through Pakistan, whatever. The climate crisis today and what is happening around in Bangladesh, the way Bangladesh affects Bangladesh, the way it's affecting Kashmir, and the water that we're not having in Pakistan, it's affecting all of us, the whole of humanity. And we have to now connect our struggles against racism, the women's struggle, environmental struggle, all those struggles are going to be connected. And in order for us to contribute our skills to bring about a more equitable world, and the world has become even smaller now. So I don't know, I went around the circles, but I just wanted to come back to, for me, the national question has always been a really important issue. I made films on Northern Ireland. I made films on Kashmir because I've always been fascinated. I went to India to understand what happened in 47. And, when we moved, as I say, the 2 feet when they moved, at some point, these boundaries came into being called Pakistan and Bangladesh. And, yes, people were persecuted and moved, but what we mustn't do is then start to persecute others. I'm not a nationalist, and so in Pakistan, I side with the religious minorities. And similarly, I think you mentioned the Bangladeshis, so there is those in Bangladesh that support and side with Pakistan. You can't just forget about their narrative. I think Masuma kind of alluded to that, the Biharis and people like that, right? So there needs reconciliation, and we need to hear everybody's stories, and we need to move forward constructively for the greater good, without brushing the carpet, the genocide and the rape, and we have to apologize. And I hope one day in Pakistan we will get people in power, ordinary people, I'm sure, would be prepared to apologize. And I apologize what took place as a Pakistani. But I'm sure, you know, and artists, especially in Pakistan, are hungry for that dialogue and the work that you're doing, right? So sorry, I went on a bit there, but yeah.
Can I just add, in reflection to what Mukhtar said about the two-state solution? One of the founding principles of Bangladesh was secularism as part of Sheikh Mujib's 5-point plan. I'm laughing because some of that secularism and freedom is being eroded now. I think Bangladesh is losing its way in terms of equality, and dissenting voices are being shut down in prison and so on. So in that respect, I'm quite embarrassed and really upset about all of that. You know, I'm 50 now, so you look at Bangladesh in a different way. Bangladesh is as old as me. Yeah, at a young age, I was more nationalistic. Am I still nationalistic? No, I believe in equality. I believe in giving minorities equal rights. You know, we're a minority in UK, and we are afforded really good rights, some of the best in the world, and we're very grateful for that. Coming back to your questions around young people and what we can do, we're working on a project for next year. It's called Freedom 50. And Freedom 50 is a big overarching idea that we will deliver various projects to celebrate 50 years of Bangladesh. We've got a bike ride, we've got some flag raising ceremonies. And one of the ideas that we have is working with the Rep Theatre, which you guys were at, is to develop a play for young people to perform in. We're just tightening things up between 14 to 18-year-olds, and they will put a play on towards the end of next year, and we're going for funding for that. We do have a role to share their stories with younger people, and what we realize is they don't have the same connections as we do. So for them, the feeling's different. I have 2 daughters, and my personal responsibility is ensure that I take my girls to Bangladesh as much as I can, because it's important for them to connect to their heritage, their roots. And if you lose that, we are minorities in a country, and without our identity and heritage holding us strong, we will become confused, in some respects, disillusioned, and you know, it can lead to other things where if you don't have an identity, one of the great things about us as a community is that how we've retained a lot of our identity, our uniqueness, and in some respects, as a family, we can say we've let go of certain things that we think are oppressive, and we've adopted things we think are more equal and better for us as a family. So, you know, you talk about where you make changes. You start with your family, and you get that right, and then you try to permeate through that, and it's entirely up to individuals to make those changes. I'll stop there.
Is there any, from like any of you, including Suma, is there any story you feel that has like sort of like changed your perspective?
For me, one of the things that kind of changed me, had a big impact, was that actually when I was growing up in Pakistan, in my village, my father was here working in the steel factories. So I was very close to my grandfather. In fact, my grandfather is the one that kind of brought me up and gave me my values. And he was the first Haji in the village. And I remember one occasion, I must have been about 6, 7, walking with him across the fields. And I ran into the fields in the, you know, and he shouted at me and called me back to get onto the path. You know, we call it, in Punjabi, call it Banera. So this is a path which separates the field. And this field has been plowed, there's corn growing in it. And I was running through it and breaking corn and everything. Called me back and he clattered me around the ear. And he said to me, don't you understand that some man has plowed that land and his family's livelihood depends upon that. So in life, stick to the right path and make sure it's the righteous path. And it always echoes in my mind. that that was a metaphor and about there is a righteous path in life that we need to stick to, and so that's a story that I remember that I wanted to share. I also just wanted to come back to the issue that Aftab raised about TN. I think TN is a really important initiative, and we here in Birmingham, Aftab, myself, Mohammed, we've struggled to make sure it's embedded in the communities. But at the same time, if it wasn't for TN, then this dialogue that's happening now would not happen. And while some of the other organizations get bigger slice of the cake, but some of the great work that's coming out, the work that some of the interviews that you've done, especially to facilitate a dialogue from artists in Pakistan with artists in Bangladesh, seeing what I saw, what you guys have done, I think it's really important. And even though it's happening on a shoestring, it's really important work. And there's another guy in Karachi who's doing some music projects with musicians in Bangladesh. So it's taken a long time, but some really positive things are beginning to come out of this. And the fact that we've had this dialogue where actually we've known each other for a long time, me and Aftab, but we've never really had an opportunity to kind of sit down and talk about these things. So there is some positive things that are coming out of TN, but it's a struggle to make sure it's still kind of rooted in advocating for our communities, really.
Can I respond to Samira's question? So one of the biggest things that changed my life was just for reflection or for the purpose of this interview. I was born in Bangladesh. I came to the UK when I was 6, and then I went back when I was 9 and stayed there for a year until I was 10. And the next time I went back, I was 22 years of age. It was an absolute culture shock for me. And just a bit further background. My dad had 2 brothers, so there's 3 of them. 2 of them made it to England, my father and my uncle, the middle one. And the youngest uncle decided to stay in Bangladesh to look after the land. And he didn't want to come to UK. He wanted to stay, and he was more religious than my father and so on. So he decided to stay. So when I went back at the age of 22, I realized how poor my cousins were. They were shockingly poor. And I kind of sat there and thought about how lucky I was living in the UK. It was a period when you got student grants. You didn't have to pay to go to university. In fact, you got paid to go to university. So I came back and started to study and went to uni when I was 23 to do my degree. But I've never, ever forgotten my relatives, even to date. I helped them out. I even, after that first visit, I gave my cousin at the time, my first cousin who's only 6 months between me, I gave him enough money to buy a car, to set up a business in Bangladesh. And then, and just 2 weeks ago, I've given them more money to set up a different business. So I've never forgotten my roots. I am duty bound to help them. And had I not made it and I was there, I would have looked to them for help. So yeah, I'm bound. It's my personal duty to support them for as long as I can, as long as I live,
So this has been a very heavy conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. In the sense that it's given a very good insight into the Birmingham life, which one can see when we visit, but we don't get into the nitty-gritties of how you guys live, what happened. So yeah, I've really enjoyed this. So what would you, how would you say that transforming narratives should, I think the project is really ending. It started, yeah, Aftab, don't shake your head. It is ending. So they have one grant left. Oh, are they going to continue?
No. Why I'm shaking my head is because Mukhtar's on the board of TN. They've invited me to join their board recently because Mohammed has left. And I've told them, I said, why would you stop something that you've developed? What is the point?
Yeah.
You know, you've spent the last 2 years developing a brand network and it's just ready. So my view is that I will join the board and I will work with them to ensure that there's continuity. This is just a start, you know, and
I think so too. I think it's too short for a 3-year program. I think it should continue because it's really building bridges. It's really
yeah,
connecting people. Yeah.
yeah. And Mukhtar and I both have experience of building organization and sustaining them. That's what we've been doing for decades, and we will plow our energy into sustaining TN and keeping it going for many years to come, hopefully. I can say inshallah, but you know,
Inshallah, yeah. That sounds good. Yeah.
yeah.
I had been doing some work with artists in Pakistan before transforming narratives. So we had some connections. I was going back quite regular, making films and this and the other. But what transforming narratives enabled us to do is to structure that. And it's important because also through these connections, and that Aftab is correct, we shouldn't just kind of let it go. The connections that have developed are really important because for the next generation, through some of the connections and the projects that are taking place, it gives them a connection to Bangladesh and to Pakistan. And part of it is that, people have some really we have some real challenges in the UK and in Birmingham, and we have Islamophobia. There's the racism has changed in its forms and all that stuff, right? And a lot of our young kids are now growing up, and Aftab's talked about having deep roots, and and we come from a generation where we have memories. We grew up there, and we have memories of Pakistan and Bangladesh or whatever. And it's really important that our young kids start growing up, that they have a connection. My children are half Pakistani, half Mauritian, so their ancestors came from India, and our identities are fluid. They're always evolving and changing. So it's important that young kids understand the history of their ancestors and their contributions and what they did and how they got here, and also that they're tolerant, and that actually we contribute to the city, and the city that was known for communities coming together now has become very fragmented. Mm-hmm. There are silos. So communities are keeping to themselves. The Pakistanis here, the Kashmiris there, the Indians there, the Bangladeshi, whatever. And that's not what the city was before. Mm-hmm. People shared platforms and talked together and stuff, right? So it's important that our young kids understand their history, have connections. They shape their own destiny going forward, and they shape their own identity as well. A Brumi identity, which is multicultural, multiracial, tolerant, not bigoted. So that's the work. That's through transforming narrative and the projects that we do, we can contribute to that. And transforming that, it's important in that respect because it's given us that connection to artists from Pakistan and Bangladesh, and the dialogue that we're having.
Yeah. Can I just add? I've been working on the leadership program for the last 18 months or more. I'm the co-chair of it, and at some stage they wanted me to step down. I said, look, I'm not happy to step down yet. Let's see the leadership program through, and then we can take it from there. And I'm so hopeful about that because whilst we've connected and Mukhtar and I are slightly older than you guys, I'd love to see more young people connect and collaborate and share stories. That's a hope that I have through this leadership program, as and when we can get it through. It would have happened this September had it not been for the COVID situation. So hopefully next year sometime we can pick it up.
Is it like can you just share one or two?
Yeah.
Okay, so part of the TN program, one of the subcommittees was around leadership. So the aim of that leadership group was to develop training to bring together 6 people. I think 3 from Pakistan, 3 from Bangladesh, and no, actually it's more. I think it's 20 people in total from Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Birmingham to work together to go through a learning program. There is the 2 levels. There's the emerging leaders and intermediate leaders, and they would work together and go through a leadership program and also collaborate and do some joint work together where they produce some work together. So that's what I'm really, really hopeful about going forward. Can I just also say 1 or 2 things? So Mukhtar Mukhtar and I have collaborated and worked together for over 20 years now, haven't we, Mukhtar?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a special relationship, Mukhtar and I, and it's of mutual respect. And Mukhtar is slightly like an older brother to me. So he's always been very, very supportive when he used to work at the drum. We put on plays. One of the plays was really, really powerful called Birangana, which was about the rape of Bangladeshi women by the Pakistani soldiers. So we will continue to collaborate beyond TN or whatever. And we always talk and we always share our frustrations with each other and console each other and move forward. And we want the best for our communities. You know, we want the best. We want our children to flourish and do extremely well, you know. On top of all that, my daughter wants to be an actress. So, you know, we'll see how that works out. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
You're not going to stop her.
Absolutely not. She's absolutely not. Both of them are musical as well. And, you know, this is the truth. Our fathers barely survived. We've survived. You know, we have wealth. We are now considered middle class people. Our children will live and they'll flourish and they'll enjoy. You know, that's why we work so hard, to ensure that they can live well. And that's the sacrifice we've made for them. So we shall see.
Acha, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for making this happen, joining us, you know, sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, just it's a really, really good project what you guys are doing. And
Yeah.
as I say, I looked at the one of the podcasts. I'm looking forward to seeing the others, because just the human stories are so important, and that's how we get rid of prejudices and ignorance and all the rest of stuff. It's when you meet people, the stereotypes go out the window, you know.